Good morning everyone. We're going to be using watercolours to do some loose flower work, and this is going to be fairly loose, okay? Now that means that I've got watercolours across the two different forms. Well, actually it's three different forms. I'm going to be using some pans, okay? I'm going to be using some tubes, and I'm going to be using watercolours in pencil, just to make it really exciting today. First of all though, when you're doing anything like this, you're going to need a decent image to work on. So I've got my royalty-free Pexels lovely flower collection that I'm going to be working on with this technique. You can use this if you want to, the link will be below, or you can go and check out other flowers that they've got on the website. Feel free to play around with the technique. So I've got my reference image. I've also been looking at the colours that I'm going to be pulling into this and the stages, which we're going to talk through in a moment. But before I get onto that, you're going to need the materials. First of all, some watercolour paper. This is 300 GSM A4 size watercolour paper. You could go bigger if you want to. I wouldn't go lower than 300 GSM, and I'd use a decent quality, if I can get my words out. I'll put my false teeth back in. Because it's going to get wet, and it's going to be wet for a long time. If you're using the cheaper stuff with a higher recycled pulp in it, it has a habit of having holes and falling apart a bit, so it is worth spending your money and getting a decent quality. And by decent quality, I do not mean uber expensive like some watercolour pads are. Just be sensible. It's amazing how uncommon common sense is in this day and age, but you know what I mean. So once you've got your paper, then you're going to need your watercolours, and I've got the watercolours across all three different forms. I've got my pans in my studio set to give me some colour range as I work into the picture. I've got some tube colours that I'm going to use for the base colours. The tube colours will give me a high saturation but with a lot more water, so you'll see what I mean as I move through it. You don't have to do it that way. You can use a pan throughout, you can use the tube throughout, it's completely up to you. And I've got my watercolour pencils here, which is going to give us a special little, something extra, shall I say, as we go through. Now with these, you're going to need a piece of sandpaper or an emery board, and you will not need a huge set of watercolour papers for this effect. Watercolour pencils for this effect. You can literally just have one or two and it will look awesome. Now the other thing you're going to need are some pots with some water. So I've got my water there, I've got some pots. I have two because I'm going to be mixing two colours from the tubes. And I've got a palette down here which is going to be my colour mixing for my pans, which all will make sense as I stop and slow down for you and do the project. So first stage, you need to get your colours mixed up if you're using some tubes. If you're using the pans, guess what? You need to get your colours mixed up. This is a fast and furious way of painting. Be prepared and you'll be okay. So I've got two little cups that I'm going to be using for this. First of all, I'm going to mix up some lemon yellow, so I'm going to tube some out. Like so, and with all tube pigments, they're really much stronger than pans, therefore you don't need much, and it will go a long way. I'm going to tip some water into there, grab a brush and mix it up. I want this colour, which is looking incredibly intense, to be fairly pale and washed out. And with watercolours, to get that to work, you need to add more water. But before doing that, you need to ensure that any tubed paint is thoroughly stirred in the basic mix, or you're going to get hits of very strong colour once you start working out. Now I can see that by adding a bit more water, it should dilute the colour down nicely. If I wanted to, I could do a blob in my corner of my paper just to see how strong it is. That looks pretty good, that's where I want to be at. So I've got my yellow. Now I'm going to mix up some red. That looks a bit pinky, doesn't it, really, for what I want on here. So let's take a little bit of the yellow and add a little bit in. Now I've got to be careful, or it's going to go well orange very quickly. Add that in. That's better. That's more what I'm looking for. Oh. Now, what you should also have is another pot, and I pulled it out just by magic, so that you can pour some of your water out. Use this for any washes, and use that for cleaning your brush. Just like so. Now, with this technique, you do have to have a plan, just like the 80. You can see that I've got one here already written out. So I'm going to start off with my pinks, then I'm going to move them to my yellows. I've got those pre-made. I'm then going to work into my greens. And my greens and blues here, I need a base colour down. So on this palette over here, I'm going to mix up using the pans a base colour for those two. And that means it'll be ready to rock and roll. Oh, let's have a look at green. You could mix a green if you wanted to, or you could take one that you already have. So I've got one there. She looks like a bit of a hooker's green, I'd guess. Top of my head. Let's grab a little bit of water. You're going to get through a lot of pigment very quickly, so it would be wise, and I would recommend that you mix a decent quantity of the pigment and have it ready to go. But as it's green and it's going to be working into red and yellow, it's going to be quite dominating, so you aren't going to need much too quickly. I also want some blue. I'm going to grab some blue there. Now this is an intense blue, and again you see how strong the pigments are. A little will go a long way with the water. Once I've got that, so green, blue, I'm going to use some red and pinks. Oh, let's get some red and pink ready. I'm going to go with a cadmium red because the other one's got a little bit of contamination. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit more of a kind of skin tone creamy mix. So if I add in a little bit of yellow ochre to my red, I should get more of a creamier. Looks pretty decent. It needs a little bit more water added to. But there you go. Okay, so I am ready to go on the paintbrush. I need to grab my two pencils that I wanted to work with, and I'm going to use a dark blue and a strong green. I'm going to move those to one side so I have a little bit more room to work in. Bring that over and fold that over it as well so that you can see me working through this process. Now this process, what you're ultimately looking through doing is working up in 3 layers. Your first layer is going to be very light. It's going to be the flowers that you want to drift into the background of the artwork. Then you're going to work up to the middle kind of ground where the flowers are getting a little bit more dominating, stronger mid-tones maybe. And then you're going to come in finally for some really hard hits of some darker tones, which is going to pull the picture right up close to the viewer. Now you're probably thinking, what on earth is Kim talking about at this stage? It will become clear as we work through this. So I've got a pointed head brush. This is a number 8, and I'm going to grab a little bit of water on there, and I want this to be fairly washed out. I'm going to hold the brush towards the end of the handle, and I'm going to start painting in my yellow flowers. I've got no drawing, I am literally painting water on to where I want those yellow flowers to go. So I am squiggling, if that's a good terminology. Then I'm going to take my yellow and I'm going to start bleeding it in for the petals. And I'm using my brush so that you get these petal shapes. You can see I'm kind of pressing down like so. Let's get the yellow on like so. I'm going to clean my brush and I'm going to pick up a little bit of the red and I'm going to start putting that down for the pink flowers that are going to be sitting around here. And I'm not worried that things are running. This is the natural technique for this. for certain colours to run into another. So I'm touching the yellow, they're mixing, it's all good. My desk is at a slight angle to even encourage the running from this type of drawing, well, painting. The other thing is, if you splatter a bit of red, as you can see I did up there, it's all going to add to it, so it's no big problem. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to add a little bit of water just into a few of these so that it runs even more, but with the water it dilutes the pigment. Okay, I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to pick up some of that green and I'm going to start putting in my green leaves. And again, I'm not worried if the green runs into any of the red. It's absolutely fine. If anything, I'm going to wash my brush. I'm going to add a little bit of water to encourage some shades to run into one another. I'm going to pick up some of the blue, because you can see those blue berries that are down there, and just dab in areas where I want a little bit of shadow, or I want some darker blue berries to pop up. There's a few areas where that happens. Now I'm trying not to cover the entire paper. I do want some of the white to come through. So you can see here I've got patches of white coming through. I'm going to grab a little bit more green and work that in. And you know what, I think I might pick up a little bit more. Oh, that's black. I thought it was a dark green, but it's not. So I'm going to grab a little bit of cadmium and just change that green so it's got a little bit of a different tone to it. Let's grab a little bit of the blue, darken down a few areas, not too dark, just a bit, just why it's still damp, but it's getting less damp. You can see it's already starting to dry, and that means that you'll get less of a bleed. The pigment will stay more where you're putting it. Grab a little bit more green. Now, while that's still damp, and if you're finding it's drying out, you might want to wet it with a water spray. You can take your pencil and create a little bit of dust in certain areas. So I'm just going around here at the moment. We're using the watercolour pencil. And you can start seeing, usually where it gets wet, you get these lovely bled patterns working their way out. If you want to exaggerate it, like I said, you could use again a water bottle spray, but you do have to have a wet surface for this to work, so do keep that in mind. So less is more. Don't go too mad with that. I know it can be like really addictive, but let it just be, you know, a powerful hit of effect in certain places. Now, the trick here is to allow it just to dry down for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to work back into it. Right, so now that this is, it's dryish, it's not perfectly, it's just when the gloss has gone off the surface of the paper, we're going to work in a second layer. Because the paint is sitting on top of the first layer, any layers sitting on top of that are going to look a little bit stronger, okay? So we're going to work exactly the same technique that we did last time. So I'm going to go in with a little bit of the yellow. Remember that we started off with the yellow. And I'm going to work that in for some of the flowers. And don't worry if you pick up something because it's still wet. It's absolutely fine. It's going to just add to the style of the artwork. I'm going to add in a little bit of the red. The red now. And I'm going to add it in so that it bleeds into some of that yellow. I'm just kind of dabbing it in to generate some of the orange tones that you can see around the centre of those flowers. Now if you get too much like that, I'm going to grab a tissue and just gently work it off. I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm using the tip of the brush, just dabbing it in. Okay, now I'm going to take some of the red and start working up some of these roses. Again, I'm going to try and just kind of draw them in so it's very loose. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of a purple, and you can choose any colour you want. And I'm going to put that into a few areas where I want there to be a little bit more shadow work. I'm not putting huge amounts, just the odd little bit here and there. And then I've got this flower just sitting here that's very red, so I'm going to take some crimson. And again, you can use any colour you wish. And I'm going to make some squiggly lines. Just like that. Now, while that's drying off, I'm going to come over and do some grains. So if I take some ultramarine and add that into my grain that I had, that will darken it. I might need to take a little bit more of the grain just to add that in, so that I have enough pigment to work. And I'm going to do the same approach. So I'm going to look at drawing some leaves and some petals, and they're kind of loose, spontaneous, quick sketching brush marks. And if I hit some of the orange or the yellow and it bleeds a bit, that's fine, that's no problem. I'm going to darken down a few areas using the same mix. Add in a little bit of shadow here and there, wherever I wish. And now, should be having quite a nice mix of colours. Now, I've got a little bit of white up here that I'm just going to splatter out. Now, to splatter out, I'm going to use the same kind of colours that I've been using. So I'm going to take my yellow, just nice and light, and I'm just going to load up the end of my brush and tap it gently. So it's a very controlled way of doing it. Now, I'm going to go for a little bit of green, just to make my background connect to my picture. And I'm going to bring a little bit down into the flowers to make that connection quite strong. Now I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to add a little bit of water just to those back ones, so it might bleed out the occasional dots. Just a little bit, not too much though, or it'll end up giving you problems. I think I might just fancy a little bit of blue actually. Go in with blue. Okay. Now at this stage, so we've done layer 1 where we were bleeding all different colours. Layer 2, we're just starting to build up the drawing stage in the process. And layer 3 will be about defining detail. You need to allow this now to dry off. You could give it a bit of a hairdryer if you want, or you could just go and have a break for 10 minutes and it should be good. Right, I'll see you in a moment. Right, so you can see here I've allowed mine to dry for a little bit longer. I've got a little bit of a wet mark down here, but it's nothing too serious, I can work around that. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to start building up a little bit more refined detail, okay? So you have to mix stronger, darker colours this time to get it closer to that point. You're going to be using more your palette and probably the pans if you've got more colours in that. Still work kind of to the softer colours first. So really the best way of dealing with this is going for a strong dark shade. I'm going to go in here with a little bit, I'm going to go with like a Prussian blue, which is going to be quite strong. And then I'm going to go for a nice strong crimson red as well. Okay. Now I'm going to make that crimson red a little bit more orangey because I've got that orangey shade. Take a little bit more of the cadmium yellow. Now I'm going to do the red to start off with, and then I'm going to come in with the blue. So with the red, let's start working in some of the detail lines. You might find that you want a smaller, finer brush as well to work this up. And you can get your brush a little bit damp. Just ease out anywhere that you feel that it's a little bit strong and that you want a little bit more of a blurred result, so that it works in harmony to the layers that you've got already in the picture. Now if you use the tip of the brush, get lots of really interesting textural marks representing the flowers that you can see. And you should start seeing some structure coming through. I'm going to dilute this. Just do a little bit on the yellow. Okay, so you should end up something that kind of looks like this. I'm going to soften out some of this red here. You can always take a tissue and blot off any excess if that's what you want to do. I'm going to build up a little bit more for the berries coming down here. So I've got a few stems that I can be playing with later on. I'm just flicking the brush out. I'm not too worried about being accurate. But remember, this is about being very loose and building up the artwork. Okay. Now you're doing the same approach with the green, so let's just use a little bit of green, and I've got a bit of ultramarine in there, and we're going to throw in a little bit of area where you're getting some shadows to set some of the flowers back, give it a little bit of different definition for a few of the areas. Still try and keep your drawing very loose. Don't get too tight. It's easy to start trying to get very realistic. It's not the plan with this type of work. Okay. Now you're doing the same approach with the green. So let's just use a little bit of green, and I've got a bit of ultramarine in there. And we're going to throw in a little bit of area where you're getting some shadows to set some of the flowers back, give it a little bit of different definition for a few of the areas. Still try and keep your drawing very loose. Don't get too tight. It's easy to start trying to get very realistic. It's not the plan with this type of work. Right, so you should be able to see how I've built this one up. I've been adding in my darks. Generally my darks are focused down towards this bottom lower section. It's a little bit up the sides, but keep your warmer sections here and your lighter faded out sections in the top upper area of the piece of paper. If you found that you've gone too dark anywhere, just use a wet brush and work it out with a tissue. I've also added in a little bit of a very washed out blue in the background to pull the whole artwork together, because otherwise it just looked too hard with the white background. It's all personal taste though, so it's up to you if that's where you want to go with it. Now the aim of this is to keep the drawing loose, the brushwork's flicking, and just using the tip of your brush to draw very lightly. Now the best way of really getting a good drawing is to keep your eye on the reference image and not worry so much about the painting. The painting will come through if you're concentrating and you're pulling it across. Also, just go with it, see what happens. It's about colours bleeding into one another and having some fun, not getting an accurate, highly beautifully representative form of this picture. It's your inspiration to create something that's yours, in your style and your voice. Okay, well it's now your turn to have a go. If you want to use a reference picture below, please do. build up some colours. See you next week. Bye everyone.